Welcome back to Ask the Professor with Professor Steven Rochlitz. I'm Georgia Peck from Canary Kitchen. Today we are going to be talking about neurological disorders, including epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, autism, brain injury, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, chronic pain, dysautonomia, and functional neurological disorders. Our question today is there a common factor causing many chronic neurological disorders? Before we begin this episode, I want to share a bit about my own health. I had been struggling with chronic pain and undiagnosed symptoms since age 14. Over the years, I visited so many doctors, naturopaths, and alternative healers, but none of them helped me, and some actually made me a lot worse. I never got a clear diagnosis, but I just kept searching for answers. After my high-risk pregnancy, I ended up with even more strange symptoms, and I pretty much lost hope of ever finding the root cause behind my problems. A month ago, I found Professor Steven Rochlitz, and after reading his books and consulting with him, I now finally understand what has been going on with my body all these years. I have found real lasting pain relief, and most of my symptoms have now disappeared. I want to share what I have learned with the chronic illness community, and so I am here with Professor Rochlitz to answer your questions and provide information into the true nature of most chronic conditions and mystery symptoms. So let's get started with our main question today. Professor Steve, is there a common factor causing many chronic neurological disorders?
Thank you, Georgia. There definitely are common factors causing that are often ignored, not understood well, that can be causing all those different neurological disorders and others. And I thought that I would do today's podcast uh, by mostly going over numerous cases. Because again, while I was originally a physicist and physics professor, this year marks 40 years that I've actually been doing holistic health, alternative medicine. Though I'm again only a physicist and not a medical doctor, but I have seen for 40 years people have come to see me from around the world, and I myself have taught seminars around the world. And have had so many remarkable cases, including with these illnesses you've just cited. And so I think the best way to go over what can be done and what may be causing is to actually give you some of these examples. And so let me start with epilepsy, because again, this is a common illness. And the very first person I saw was a young girl whose father brought her in, was diagnosed with epilepsy and having seizures, and got tested and got the diagnosis, and was on potent drugs, which the father could see were adversely affecting his daughter. That all a lot of the neurological drugs, the anti-seizure drugs, almost all the psychiatric drugs, they have a great deleterious effect on the brain. And so he wanted to see if there's something else that can be done to eliminate the epilepsy, or to at least make her better, and that try to take her off the drugs. So again, this is like 40 years ago. I didn't know a billionth of what I know now, but I had mastered techniques to use applied kinesiology, muscle testing, energy testing, to both check for nutrient deficiencies and also food sensitivities. So I did all that some 40 years ago and gave them the diet. I don't recall which foods now were doing it. Certain supplements, of course, are known to help. But the main thing is to be rigorous if these foods are possibly affecting. And there's ways of seeing which organ that a food sensitivity or food allergy causes. Anyway, so he came back, I believe, about a month or two later, and reported to me that he rigorously followed the diet, and he slowly weaned his daughter off all the medication, a little bit at a time. And it's been a couple weeks now. She's completely drug free and is also seizure free. And so he told me that he thanked me, and he told me he wants to bring her back to that neurologist to get tested. And I didn't know how corrupt everything is, like I know now, but I knew enough to say, I think what you should do is the following: go to a new neurologist, tell him your daughter seems to have mild symptoms that you're afraid might be epilepsy, and you'd like her to have the complete testing. Do not mention that she's already diagnosed with epilepsy and already on the standard drugs for it. And so he said, I'll do just what you say. And I saw him a few weeks later, and he told me what had happened. He took her to a neurologist, did not mention the previous diagnosis and the previous drugs, because I had told him, well, anyway. And so the daughter got the complete testing again, and this time did not show a hint of epilepsy, of seizure activity. And the doctor ended up concluding with him, well, why you wasted my time with this? So he came back and told me all that, and of course thanked me. And but what I had told him is how it would likely have gone if he had told me she'd already diagnosed with that and already on drugs. All that doctor might not even have wanted to test her. It would have just said, "Hey, you put her back on those drugs right away, or I'll call the authorities on you. And I want the name of the person that told you that it's connected to food sensitivities and nutritional deficiencies. I'm going to get him in trouble too." But fortunately, he didn't do any of that, and did what I asked, and the daughter was, permanently cured. Anyway, so another case of epilepsy. Fast forward like 35 years or more, and I had become well aware of porphyria, and again, that one of the leading cause of epilepsy, if it's non-trauma cause and non-infectious disease cause, then other than those two, the leading cause of epilepsy is porphyria. And it's, again, almost never considered, because as I've said in the previous podcast, the medical doctors all learn about porphyria, and a neurologist would know even more, okay? But again, they all memorize, it's ultra rare, and you never see one in your practice. When the Downing-Rochlitz hypothesis says 1 out of 5 people have it, and with certain ethnic strains I have declared a few years ago, it could be as much as 2 out of 5. All right, certain ethnic strains: Scandinavian, Irish, Jewish, and then Scottish, English, French, Dutch, Belgian, and South African are among the highest. Literally, I do believe that 40% have the either genetic predisposition or actually suffering at least a mild case. But anyway, so the second case of a few years ago is highly illustrative, all right, and different in the sense that this was also a similar age boy when he first got it, 8 years old. Okay, the mother's contacted me. She's legal guardian of him. He's 38 and, been on disability, his whole life. And when he was 8 years old, started having seizures, which they couldn't control with drugs, all right, and did brain surgery on him. And it's rather sad just how ignorant and how corrupt it is, because, again, if he did not have a physical trauma or an infection, one, they should know that porphyria is a leading cause of epilepsy if you don't have those two other conditions, the trauma or an infection, all right? And two, they should know if he's not being helped by drugs, it means, again, he's having porphyric reactions to the drugs, and they're causing seizures instead of helping, all right? And they should know this. But each year they get more ignorant that porphyria is ultra rare and more, Anyway, so fast forward, 30 years later, when she found me, and all she contacted me for was because, again, in the last year, he was having off-colored urine. I forget, it was red or blue, okay? And sure enough, got tested for porphyria, and they got an official diagnosis of porphyria, and was doing for a year the alleged gold standard of porphyria. And in my latest edition of my first porphyria book, Porphyria, the Ultimate Cause, I go over whether heme actually helps anybody or whether it's actually causing a lot of adverse reactions. Another shocker, okay, because it's officially the gold standard. Whereas before, for porphyria attacks, you would get a glucose IV, which is still something, if you're having a severe attack, that I would personally recommend them to avoid the heme. But anyway, so he's getting heme, I forget, once a week for a whole year, and obviously hasn't helped. He's lived his life for 30 years since he got the diagnosis, since the uncontrollable seizures at the age of 8. He's lived most of his life in the ER or in the hospital for last 30 years. So she contacts me when, again, because she found out that he got an official diagnosis of porphyria, which most epileptics will never get. Anyway, but he had the red urine and finally got tested in the last year getting treatment. But she contacted me with what I call, just asking me if there's know of the magic doctor with a magic pill. It's basically, that's my rephrasing of what she's asked me for. And I told her, one, there's no such thing. Two, I don't do that. and I convinced her to order my books and do a consultation. Okay, and went over among the things in the consultation was his diet, supplements, and going over how to do certain energy balancing techniques on him, which are illustrated in my books. And just a few days later, after suffering for 30 years with this, again living most of his life in the hospital or the ER, she contacts me just a few days later, said you made the diet changes, all right, and doing the energy balancing, which you could see helping immediately. She taught him how to do it. They called me again while they were in the car, and he wasn't feeling so well, and they did a correction for the vagus nerve, calmed the vagus nerve, and said, "Ma, I feel better right away." But anyway, another phone call from her, which I think was before that, she told me like just a few days after doing a consultation with me that he's out of the hospital for several days now, which I think like the first time in 30 years. And she said he's out golfing with his father now for the first time in decades, and she's crying tears of joy.
Wow.
Um, and of course, it brings me great joy that you can do that for people. But and again, in this case, only lucky they found me because he had enough porphyrins coming out of him, which probably again means he's still reacting to drugs. So he had off-colored urine, and finally got a porphyria diagnosis, which led her to me. But most epileptics will probably not show that severe a level of porphyria. But again, the leading, and again, I didn't know that when I had the first little girl, back in 1980 or so. Um, but able to help her by doing, with applied kinesiology, the testing for foods, and told him what to get off and what supplements perhaps to take. Then I also make sure to test for allergy. So uncontrollable seizures. And again, he was said to be, again, living his life in the hospital at that point, a helpless case of both epilepsy and porphyria. So all she contacted me with, again, was just the magic doctor with a magic pill for me to recommend, which I said I don't know anyone, I don't do that, and told her that you can get well. And he did in just a few days.
Wow.
Um, Let me go to talk about multiple sclerosis now. Um, I think I created in 1985 what's called the Rochlitz heart integration exercise. It explained why the music conductors live, many of them into their 90s, and have such vitality that the arm motion that they're doing, which again is illustrated in several of my books, is doing something specific to energize the heart and get the two halves of the heart to work better. I actually coined the term dyslexic heart, in analogy to dyslexia, which the two brain hemispheres are not communicating properly through the corpus callosum between them. So back in 1985, I created these exercises and the theory, and I coined the term dyslexic heart, which I later found that, I don't know, some 10 years, 20 years ago, actually had a song, a rock song, but I don't know if they got that from me or whatever. But so there's the 3 Rochlitz heart integration exercises, and it also explained why the music conductors live so long. But anyway, when I created these exercises in 1985 for myself, because I had cardiac arrhythmia and they took it away, I did not realize for another 20 years when I got diagnosed like you with the hole in the heart called patent foraminal valley. And sure enough, that is like in the center there between the two heart halves, between the two upper chambers, is that area that didn't completely close. It's an opening or a tunnel. And I believe that was ultimately the cause of the arrhythmia I had. But I created the exercise and it completely took away my arrhythmia. Back in 1985, I was at a conference when I figured this out. And then I got home. I had like the first client to try it on was a woman in her 30s who had diagnosed and had severe limitation for 15 years with multiple sclerosis. She limped badly. She had it all on one side of the body. The techniques I'm going to describe work best for with MS if it's only having it for a few years, or if it's limited to one side of the body, which it frequently is. But it's in many other cases, though, it can be all 4 limbs. But I find these techniques to be most effective. But again, a person needs a complete workup to find out if they have porphyria, if they have overgrowth, if they have allergies. I can do all that with my applied kinesiology session. But anyway, uh, she showed me her ankle that's been swollen steadily all the time for 15 years straight. And sure enough, that was the leg again that she limped badly. And she had been a very active skater and things before that. Anyway, so I said, I just figured something out, did it on myself, and I'd like to do it on you. When we become known as the Rochlitz heart integration exercise. And she did it with a little difficulty, but I helped her to do it. And after doing it, in seconds, we saw her ankle unswell before us
Wow.
for the first time in 15 years. And I asked her to walk, and now she could walk normally and could even run. And her medical doctor actually called me in for me to drive out there 40 miles because he told me, which I didn't know, because again, I'm, quote, just a physicist, unquote. Anyway, her physician called me in there. Maybe he was considering hiring me or something, but that didn't work out. Anyway, and he tells me she's no longer showing the Babinski sign. And I didn't know what it was, but you can look that up. Babinski sign is like if you take a pencil or some instrument, go up the sole of the foot, the toes will curl in a certain way that is not supposed to happen. But anyone, a child under a year of age, will show that. Anyone who's had traumatic brain injury will show that. People with multiple sclerosis will show the Babinski sign. So I hadn't heard of it, but he told me that after the session with me, what I did with the exercise, she no longer showed the Babinski sign. So he was very impressed, both with eliminating that sign, because standard medical literature, you don't fix that. Anyway, and I've done that for many people with MS. I'll give another example to fast forward. My largest class I taught in Germany was in like 1992. I had 70 students, including 30 MDs. Including some of the top MDs in Germany, because one of my books was actually published and translated and published in Germany, and by a big publisher, so it was more well known there actually. Anyway, after teaching them the Rochlitz heart integration exercises, I asked the 70 students, including the 30 MDs, if anybody knew of somebody with multiple sclerosis that I'd like to see what this might be able to do for someone who has that. So the next day, one of the students was an MD, brought in his patient, who was also owner and chef of a famous French restaurant there in Germany. And so he brought him. So at the end of that session, I had him come up with his patient, and I asked the man to walk, and he walked with a bad limp. I asked one of the physicians to come up and to shake both his left and right hand, and she said, sure enough, it's much weaker on the same side as the bad leg. So I said, okay. And we got him on the table, and actually had my students, including his physician was my student, and 3 others actually do the motion with the arms and legs, the Rochlitz heart integration exercise. Because of his limitation, it might be better if they helped him out. And that case is actually was written up in a medical journal. Townsend letter it's on my website. The people look on my testimonial page, you'll find what a doctor who witnessed that wrote up, that got published, and it's also on my website. Anyway, so in about 20 minutes of the students doing that, my Rochlitz heart integration exercise, and numerous other techniques for his legs, for his hands, for his brain, for his heart, less than 20 minutes, I was doing things. These are just my basic techniques, by the way. But anyway, after less than 20 minutes of working on him, I asked him, to get off the table, and then I asked the physician who had done this before to shake his left and right hand. She said, now they're both strong, they're equal strength, they're both strong. And then I asked him to walk, and he walked normally. And I said, well, I'm going to go alongside you. I would like to see if you can run. And just in case there's a problem, I'll try to catch you. I'll run alongside you. And he ran almost completely normally. And all 70 students immediately stood up and gave me a standing ovation.
Wow.
And that did get published in a holistic medical newsletter journal. And again, it's on my website on the testimonial page near the bottom. Dr. Jung, Jung, look for her feedback. It was the days before everybody had a cell phone camera. So the things I've done in my career, people wouldn't believe. I guess. But it's it just tells you if you deal with the cause, and that and again, I don't know how long it lasted on the fellow, because everything from having amalgam to smoking, things I don't make claim that these are permanent corrections. They can be. When we talk again, for example, in a minute about autism. Anyway, you can see quickly remarkable changes. With MS, again, I have found it to work most quickly if the person, again, has it only for a few years and or limited to one side of the body. I'm not saying it can't have a tremendous help if it's on all four limbs and longer, but it would take longer probably to show something. And there's again many things involved. Just as with the gentleman, I sure hope that got the fillings out and stopped smoking and dealt with other things. So I don't claim that it has to be permanent, but it can be. And speaking of permanent, maybe the next thing I'll talk about is autism. So I've helped numerous people and children with autism, and again to with this podcast to talk about wonderful cases that I've had. Um, I had taught a physician, environmental medicine doctor, also ear, nose, and throat, and allergist, immunologist. He had numerous specialties. He took all my seminars in the early '90s, and by 1997, I left New York and moved to Arizona. And shortly after I moved, he told me that he's recommended his daughter to bring the grandson to me, who I believe again was 8 or 9 years old, 8 years old, and had severe autism, and nobody's helped him. Orthodox, holistic medical people, nobody's helped him to get any better. So the daughter brought her son to me, and it was a difficult case. He was basically like catatonic when I saw him. Wouldn't talk, wouldn't show any kind of emotion, wouldn't do anything. It would apply kinesiology to have a thing called surrogate testing, where I would put the foods on the boys and see. He was old enough to have done a muscle, because I've done muscle testing on boys or girls that age. But anyway, put the food on his body while the mother holds his hand, and I'm able to test the arm strength of the muscle of the mother. And again, that's easily proven that energy is transmitted between people. All right, as you well know. Anyway, so again, I did complete food allergy testing. Did some other type of testing. Did a little energy balancing, um, and uh, and they left. He had numerous food sensitivities, but he was in a very bad way. He just like catatonic. Anyway, a couple months later, I heard back from the mother. Didn't say how he's doing, and said they'd like to bring him back for me to check him again. And they brought him back again before the days of cell phone cameras. The instant he walked through the door, I knew. He was smiling. He was talking. He actually ended up reading for me a little bit. There was almost nothing for me to do because he was quite well.
Wow.
And well and happy. Um, and so there wasn't that much for me to do. He was in such good health. Like I said, talking, smiling, laughing, and reading, a little reading. And so I never heard from him again. And fast forward 15 years later, okay, when I was having trouble getting a medical doctor for a forward for one of my books, and I had reached a father who, had retired and was actually on vacation in Europe, but I got hold of an email and sent that to him, and he replied to me, and I was requesting if he would write forward to my book, and he told me, he said, well, before I answer your request, whether I'll, grant your request to write the forward, he told me, let me tell you how it went with my grandson after that, basically the one visit with you. Okay. And he said, just in the past year, he graduated college and he got engaged. And after that one visit, he led a happy, healthy, normal life.
Wow.
And I asked him if he would. And he said, well, I think that answers your question. I certainly will, write the forward. And he did. And he wrote a wonderful forward where he included that, Professor Rochlitz is the very first to illuminate the entire elephant in the darkened room, the elephant being environmental illness. People have lots of food or chemical sensitivities because he didn't really know the Porphyria connection and all these other things. So he wrote a wonderful forward to my Porphyria book, but he told me he will not mention that his grandson ever had that because you would never know that he had ever been autistic, let alone severely autistic. Okay, I don't mind mentioning I've mentioned the book or whatever because it was his daughter's son, so you would never figure out his last name because they take the last name of the father. Anyway, so that's about the only time in my books that I use the word cure is if, 10, 20 years later, they tell me they was good. You can't, claim a cure just because a muscle test is strong or an energy machine or something. Unfortunately, there's people that use banty about the word cure. I only mention it in any of my books when, well, after the fact, they've told me that's what happened. So again, if he didn't find me, they would have probably just all kinds of drugs or most likely supplements, and it wouldn't have gotten to the underlying problem and probably would have had a not very happy, healthy life. All right. And so, fast forward that another half a decade, just a couple years ago, that case was found out by this couple in France. All right. And so they ordered my books. And before that, they contacted me to do phone consultation. All right. Because the books wouldn't arrive for a week or two. And they went over, and then they told me, again, I cited a little bit of that in a previous podcast, that they had gone to everybody in different countries from France and seen the Lyme expert, of course, who gave the Artemisia wormwood and only made him sicker. And they were about to bring him to Germany to get the injection of the Artemisia compounds and doing all kinds of things, all kinds of tutoring, and nothing's helping. I forget, either was never said a single word or just maybe barely able to get every once in a while get a word out and not much more. So I did consultation with them, strongly urged them they were doing GAPS diet, which was terrible, the foods they were giving him every day. And so I strongly urged them to not go to Germany, again, not to give them any herbs or things without being tested with my methods. In lieu of that, don't take anything. Changed the diet. He did some energy balancing. And then within just a couple of weeks, he was saying words and very quickly sentences. And just a month or so later, again, I heard from the mother saying he won't stop talking, that he's complaining now all the time. I told her, without realizing what's happening, you're giving him food or supplements that, really adversely affected. He probably has a lot to complain about. But I said, this too will pass. And it did. So it was a, happy, healthy, young boy learning, reading, talking. And so another, permanent cure that I could use because it's now several years. And again, but what is holistic? Orthodox people, I think, either don't have a clue or I don't they actually give people drugs. But again, porphyria is a common cause of autism. That's a link that's even like on my website. It's not just, and one of the leading causes, of course, is that for many years they had a mercury preserved with thimerosal in the vaccines. And even if they stopped that in the last 10 years, there's many other toxins in the vaccines. In Japan, I know they won't start vaccination until the baby is at least a year old. I think in the U.S., I think they want to do it a week after birth or something.
Yeah.
And again, and the issue of mercury is something that can't be overemphasized, how utterly corrupt everything is. And mercury is itself, and along with the porphyria inducement, a very common cause of almost any chronic neurological problem. Lou Gehrig's disease has been strongly linked to that, multiple sclerosis. But any neurological, immunological, kidney disorder can be due to mercury and or the porphyria that induces. But people need to think about that. Since the late 1600s and what became known as Mad Hatter disease, where the hatters were tipping a brush to make the felt smoother and dipping a brush in mercury, in a mercury liquid compound and touching their tongue and got mercury into their body. But the point I'm raising is that since the late 1600s, our species has known what an incredible poison mercury is for human beings. And by the 1800s, published articles in medical journals declared also a cause of immunological problems, kidney problems. So we've known since the late 1600s what an incredible, that mercury is nothing but an incredible poison for human beings. Okay. But what is all this while, what has happened? Okay. Dental associations have falsely proclaimed that the mercury is starting in was it around 1800? It's in one of my books. A chemist in England, of course, simply melted a silver coin and combined it with liquid mercury, which was very easy to get until recent times, because it's a pretty thing to look at, a ball of mercury rolling down, and melted a silver coin and combined it with mercury and had the first amalgam to start putting in people's teeth. All right. Anyway, so it's been known since the late 1600s what an incredible poison mercury is when it gets in the human body. Okay. But the dental associations falsely proclaim that the mercury doesn't come out of the filling, and the two most corrupt dental associations in the world are actually the U.S. and the U.K. And people need to think about that. Okay, because by the 1980s, Sweden commissioned their metallurgy society and published it in the 1980s with conclusive proof that the mercury comes out of the amalgam almost immediately when it's put into a person's teeth. All right. And so Sweden then immediately stopped putting it in children and pregnant women. And I believe they quickly, within a few years, went to no amalgam for anybody. But to this very day, the American and British Dental Association lie their heads off and say the mercury doesn't come out of a dental amalgam filling. People need to think about that. It shows the real nature, whether there really is a democracy or not. Because democracy is supposed to be the greater good for the greatest number of people, and the majority of people, if not the totality of our species, do not want to be poisoned, yet alone. So they're allowed to still say that when it's been proven false. So again, with mercury until recently has been in the vaccines as thimerosal, and so the thimerosal and other things in vaccination definitely does cause autism as a leading cause, but there's again a genetic predisposition. I've seen one woman, a chemist, saying her daughter was completely cured of autism when she changed the diet and completely eliminated all possible sources of MSG. And again, I have found the autistic, just as with the boy I mentioned, have numerous food sensitivities. And, the parents deserve a lot of credit for that because they rigorously took them off the foods, I have found. So there's an allergy connection with autism, there's a porphyria connection, a toxic connection, a heavy metal. But it is completely reversible and curable if you get at the underlying causes. And I've done it with numerous children with autism. And of course, I've helped numerous people with more mild, the Asperger's. I've had, again, clients or parents bringing me their children. That's a more mild. And again, that's even easier to fix up with these methods. Let me go now to brain injury. A fascinating case I had was, again, locally here, 8-year-old boy that his grandmother had to sneak him in because the father was against the applied kinesiology, closed-minded individual. So the grandmother brought the son, and it was a horrible case of what happened with him. His father, again, he's 8 years old, and he starts dragging his feet, getting worse and worse. And the father just says, "Son, you're becoming a lazy individual. I'm not happy. Straighten yourself out." And the boy just more and more dragging his feet. And finally, the father woke up. I forget how many days that was, and took him to the local GP. Okay. And the GP said, "No, I'm not going to see him. Get him out of here. Take him to the ER immediately. He's got severe diabetes." So the boy was getting, juvenile diabetes, of which you need insulin to stay alive. So he took him, right away to the ER, where the physicians here at the ER here in Cottonwood, Arizona, the Verde Valley Medical Center. Sure enough, give him the wrong amount of insulin. He ends up getting, water on the brain, destroying his brain. They flew him up by helicopter to a bigger, better hospital in Flagstaff, and it had severe. Again, they gave him they gave him the wrong dose, the wrong amount, and had severe water on the brain, and to make a long story short, he be flatlined, and was had the top neurologist in the state coming to see him. And after a few days of being totally flatlined continuously for several days, the top neurologist in the state declared him legally and medically dead. So the parents, held a vigil as they turned off, the life support, and he did not die. All right, he needed, they made the PICC line or stomach to give him insulin and to feed him that way because he wasn't dying, but he was still alive, and they didn't know, was he a total vegetable? They couldn't tell. And obviously, a total vegetable or in a coma. So about a week or so later, I had met the mother and told her what I might be able to do. And they brought him to me, snuck him in against the father's wishes. And of course, I had to do what's called surrogate testing again, with the grandmother now being a surrogate. I'm testing different what's called energy circuits on the body. And sure enough, I had already learned, as you know, with the multiple sclerosis, the Babinski sign. And I did that on his feet. And sure enough, he showed the Babinski sign of severe brain injury, and did some energy balancing techniques, which are in to make the energy flow properly, the meridians, the nervous system. And I did some of these techniques on him. And I did the Babinski sign on him, and he no longer showed the Babinski sign.
Wow.
And so I went, and again, the neurologist would say, especially with that condition, you don't reverse that. And here I did in a few minutes. So I went out on a limb, and I said to the grandmother, at first I asked if she could bring him again a few more times. And I also had recommended a hyperbaric oxygen, because again, this was the early stages of that problem. And I went out on a limb and I said, I think he will completely recover, because I saw what I could do in a few minutes and no longer showing the Babinski sign. Okay. And it ends up the father didn't want to ever be brought to me again, despite what I did. Didn't want to send it, so didn't bring him back to me. Wouldn't go to do the hyperbaric oxygen. But to make the long story short, what happened with him was that he steadily got better and better. And within weeks or months, he got everything back to normal functioning except a tight leg, and he was blind. Now, I do believe that if I could have seen him some more and or getting the hyperbaric oxygen right away, that didn't need to be the case. And as far as I know, some 15 years later, again, he had operation. The leg was fixed, and the only thing that he's left with is unfortunately the vision loss. Within months of seeing me, he actually was winning spelling bees, and of course the parents won a multi-million-dollar suit against the Valley Medical Center here. But again, and this was again the top neurologist said, take him off life support. He is legally and medically dead.
Yeah.
Flatlined for several days. And I saw and again, he didn't die, which is his own innate sense and power to fight to stay alive. So he gets a lot of the credit.
It's incredible.
But it just tells you, as a top neurologist saying he's legally and medically dead from the brain injury, and it wasn't the case. Let me next talk about chronic pain. You yourself had chronic pain. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more.
Yeah, my chronic pain started at age 14. It started in the middle left of my back, and over the years it just grew out from there to the point where it covered the whole left side of my body, which was something that always confused doctors, because my complaint was always just this pain on the entire, from the top of the left side of my neck all the way down to my left fingers, my left arm and wrist, my shoulder, all the way down my leg, with chronic sciatica down my left leg and left foot, toes, everything. And so that just always seemed to confuse doctors. Finally, about a year before I found you, my my GP, her last ditch effort was, well, I can refer you to a neurologist because maybe you have multiple sclerosis. But even she claimed that she never had heard of multiple sclerosis in somebody my age, which at the time I was 25, which I think people do have MS at age 25. But that was what she offered me. And at that moment, I wasn't sure that I wanted to put myself under that much radiation. So I was just kind of sitting on it and thinking, and then a year later found you.
Well, porphyria is definitely one of the major causes of chronic pain. Medical literature talks about abdominal pain, but again, think about President Kennedy, that I have asserted had porphyria, that he had abdominal pain when he was very young, and he also ended up with severe back pain and other neuropathy throughout his whole body, and of course also had a adrenal weakness or adrenal failure, immunological, gastrointestinal, and I finally asserted, without doubt, going over his entire medical history, because that's been released, that he had porphyria. And he actually did something that he got a lot better. Is that in the 1950s, and again, he had back surgery, which only made him worse. He had to have, it almost killed him. He had an infection set in. He had to have that metal plate removed. All that ever did was almost kill him. But he was in such pain that he was told the operation was risky, but he said he can't live anymore. The pain was so severe. All right. But by the mid 50s, he found Janet Travell, MD, was called the mother of trigger point therapy, and got trigger point injections from her, and it started to get better. And she ended up becoming his White House physician. But I have asserted, even before I realized all that one of the things that porphyria does is it causes trigger points throughout the body. And that is actually the cause of chronic pain. And I have illustrated the two of the most important trigger points that anyone can ever learn. That's in my books, because they're not well known. It was a physician. His findings are not in the standard books on trigger point, but these trigger points relate to heart problems, any heart problem, and lung problems, any lung problem, asthma, bronchitis, emphysema. So these trigger points can open up the chest for the one that help people breathe, and the other one literally may open up the coronary arteries. A wonderful thing to know if you're having a heart attack. So trigger points are just an amazing set of things, points that you can do that might help with severe pain. But again, the underlying medical problems must be found. And a leading medical problem causing all kinds of pain, not just abdominal pain, is porphyria. And it also induces vitamin D deficiency, which is another thing linked to causing chronic pain. So chronic pain, as you saw in your case, just from doing a few minutes of my basic techniques, you started to have pain relief, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So much can be done with that. Let me just, because this is going longer than we thought, go to maybe mention something with Alzheimer's in a remarkable case. Because both Alzheimer's and Parkinson have been linked to pesticide. And of course, pesticides work, that most of them work. They destroy the cytochrome P4 enzymes in plants, so the plant dies. But we have very similar cytochrome P450 enzyme. So again, the pesticide means it's inducing porphyria. And that's why it is much better to buy organic produce. But the one thing to be concerned about is that in actual practice, organic produce means fertilized with horse and cow manure, and therefore they're going to be replete with protozoa and parasites, and you have to do your best to wash that. Or I tell people to get one of these food burners that they heat, they make a flame.
Oh, like a butane burner?
Yeah, the butane burners, and that only takes an instant over the whole surface area of a food if you're concerned about parasites. Otherwise, other than that, you really have to heat food, because again, organic is certainly better, but some people are very sensitive and will just reacquire parasites, which will then make them sick. And of course, the parasite toxins again induce porphyria. But organic certainly is better, but just be aware in actual practice what you're buying in the stores means it's fertilized with horse and cow manure, so it could be replete with parasites. But again, the pesticides whack out the cytochrome P450 enzyme in plants, but our P450 enzymes are almost identical. But the point that I was raising is that both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's have been strongly linked to pesticide for many years. But pesticide is just another toxin that induces porphyria.
Right.
So people have to be aware for Alzheimer's and Parkinson. You have to become aware of porphyria and act accordingly. All right. But let me give a wonderful example of Alzheimer's. I had a client back when I was in New York whose daughter brought her. She was 86 years old. Actually, had been the United States Olympic ski captain in the 1936 Winter Olympics. And when she
Wow.
was brought to me with more minor problems, she was still sharp as a tack at age 86. Very sharp mind still. So I did my usual, workup on her, food sensitivities, be able to test for overgrowths of microorganisms. It was before I knew porphyria, and test for nutritional deficiencies. And so, but she wasn't all that ill, and, did quite well. Um, and 7 years later, her daughter contacts me again and said she knows I'm expert on parasites and testing and finding safe things to take to eradicate that, because she said the mother now has like watery diarrhea, and then obviously he's got overgrowth that medical doctors are not helping. That's all she told me when she came to me and brought in the daughter. She told me the full story, that her brother, the other child of the woman is now 93 years old, and her brother had taken over the mother's finances, declared her, because again she lost her mind, declared her with Alzheimer's, got legal declaration of what is it, mentis non compos or non compos mentis, the legal term for someone who's mentally unfit. And so the son, her brother, or the daughter, took over the finances because they went to court. So here I'm seeing her again. She's now 93, and I tried talking with her, asking her questions. Anything I said to her, she replied was, "What?" I tried several times, and that's all she could say. Clearly didn't understand anything I was saying at all, and you can see why. Again, it was legally in court said to be a hopeless permanent case of Alzheimer's, and was declared non compos mentis. Anyway, so I do my testing. The reason that the daughter brought it to me, and sure enough, with the applied kinesiology, I can determine, and sure enough, that's a protozoan parasites. I'm able to test again what remedies will be safe and effective. I didn't know porphyria. Then it would be like a year later, I believe, or a couple years later, that I would find about porphyria. And but again, I already knew how to do many things with applied kinesiology. So I found the parasites. I found a remedy with my methods that would be safe and effective. Okay, and I happened a couple months later to fly out to California, where they were, and notified my clients and readers, if anyone wanted to see me, that I'll be in the in the Santa Barbara area at that point. So they actually weren't all that far away, and they brought so the daughter brought the 93-year-old mother to see me, and so they walk in the door, and I say, "How you doing?" And I had completely normal conversation with her mother again.
Wow.
She got her full wits back, even though she had been legally declared, with a mentis non compos, and even supposedly incurable level of Alzheimer's. And that was with her case, whether it was the parasite toxins alone. See, porphyrin metabolism breaks down. It's in my first Porphyria book, Porphyria, the Ultimate Cause. Porphyrin metabolism breaks down on everybody at a certain age. It's a fragile metabolism, okay? So whether she had but of course it's a vicious cycle. If you tend to have porphyria, if you got all that tremendous amount of overgrowth, that's a tremendous amount of toxin in your body, will further induce porphyria.
Right.
But again, I don't know if that was porphyria or just the overgrowths on their own can make a person sick. I have a feeling it was, given her age, that porphyria was involved, but I didn't devise my methods to be able to test until another year or two later. But the point is, she had an incurable level of Alzheimer's, legally declared, mentis non compos, and I completely reversed it. at the age of 93.
Wow.
By finding, dealing with her overgrowths and killing them off. But it just shows again, she was medically declared to have a hopeless permanent case of Alzheimer's. Hopeless permanent Alzheimer's. And all because she was lucky in that sense, had the watery diarrhea, so I checked for parasites with my methods and found a remedy that was safe and effective. And again, just 2 months later, it might have been earlier, but that's where they brought her back when I was able to see her again. And then she was 93. So it just shows however old you might be, and whatever diagnosis, these things don't have to be permanent. If you really find someone who can get at what might be causing it, it was completely reversible, even though it was quite severe. And so again, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's both have been linked to pesticide, which again rarely means linked to porphyria. Likewise, other neurological disorders such as dysautonomia, the functional neurologic disorder, also involve similar complaints, sometimes paralysis. All these things, if you're chronically sick with any neurological disorder, I strongly urge you to look into porphyria with my books and/or consultation, and take it from there, because you're going to need porphyria is involved, diet change, supplements, learn supplements to take or not to take, learn the self-energy balancing techniques. And again, they actually have for hundreds of years have terms in neurology or psychiatry, such things as hysterical blindness, hysterical paralysis. And I assert, in my opinion, without doubt, that that's porphyria. The person is paralyzed. They can't find a reason why. And the person literally goes blind. And you get the eye exam, they see nothing wrong. Okay. That again, the optic nerve or other nerves in the body, when you're having a porphyria attack, because the nervous tissue needs heme for moment to moment proper functioning. The nervous tissue needs heme. And so between chronic or episodic deficiency of heme and or the excess porphyrins, which can be toxic, to any cell in the body. So you have two reasons why any neurological complaint can come from porphyria. So in the medical or neurological or psychiatric literature, anytime you see the word hysterical this or that, hysterical blindness, hysterical paralysis, it's almost certainly porphyria. But those neurological problems that are more recent names, dysautonomia, functional neurological disorder, even the POTS, because again, adrenal failure is due to porphyria, as it was with President Kennedy. These things, much of the time, if you're not being helped by what you're doing, likely that there's a porphyria causation, partial or complete, involved, and that there's a good chance you would stop doing the wrong thing or start doing the right thing, that you can overcome many of these neurological problems.
Incredible.
So I think, was there anything else you wanted to ask me, Georgia?
I think that sums it up for this topic. Thanks for your time, Professor Steve. This is so informative.
Well, thank you, Georgia, for having me and for doing these podcasts. And I hope people, again, get Well at Last, which is the name of my website, wellatLast.com. And people can order books and can contact me through the website for if they wanted to do consultation. I think you should give your wonderful site again, because your story is also very heartening about being sick for over a decade, and everybody you went to just made you worse, and then finally getting well with the Rochlitz method. So if you give your website again too.
Yeah, so my website is canarykitchenseattle.com. If you want to read more about my story, hear about my high-risk pregnancy and everything that was involved with that, and how I finally, very recently, am feeling healthy for the first time in a very long time. So thank you, Steve. Thank you for your time and for your research and for all of your information. This is just great to get it out there.
Thank you, Georgia.